Your guys are all wondering, of course, how is it going with the weekly challenge and what have we been playing? So, for those everybody interested in Mistwalker, this is the first part of the podcast, and we'll now move on into the bonus round where we'll be talking about the weekly challenge. And I will give it to Greg to talk about the game Mother 1.
Okay, now this is a series I've wanted to get into for a very long time. At first, it really didn't interest me with the setting, but since I visited Starman.net and the other fan sites and spoken to a lot of people on YouTube, they hail the game as one of the greatest ever. So it's always interested me. So I thought last week was the week where I finally, you know, promised to play it, and I picked it up. And I gotta say, for an RPG made in 1989, it is very interesting. So let me get into what I find is the strengths of the game. Well, the biggest strength I like to talk about is the fact that the game does not take itself seriously. And that's the biggest charm I have played of the game. The enemies that you fight are completely far-fetched. From wallies to hippies to basically evil controlling cars. It really is a crazy world. That's basically its main inspiration was from, I would say, 80s America. You know, just looking at the game just reminds me of like a lot of 80s movies I watched where you would see the kids ride their bikes in the street, just playing baseball and everything. And that's what Mother sort of reminds me of. So I'd like to say the fact that that's a good thing and a bad thing because it's a matter of taste. I can honestly see a lot of people not getting into the Marvel series because honestly, it actually took me a couple of years to finally sort of get as much information I need to make the game interesting for me to play it. But initial look, I actually did not uh, I was just not interested in it at first, but just listening to everyone, I thought I'd give it a go. So basically, what the story is you've got your character, and basically he has these psychic powers, and he has to stop uh, basically these aliens. And this is pretty simplistic. I only played it for I'd say about 5 to a couple of hours, and like I said, the best thing about the story is it doesn't take itself seriously, but it's very basic, which is not a bad thing. But I can honestly see this game being more targeted towards younger children because the party is a bunch of younger children, just in like elementary school. And being an adult of 26, if I wasn't like so big into RPGs back in the day, I probably wouldn't have continued on playing it. But because I've played RPGs all my life, I'm used to games like that. It's extremely basic. It feels like Dragon Quest at times, like the really earlier Dragon Quest. Even the interface reminds me, I mean, you can't press a button to talk to people. You literally have to open the menu and talk to people, which, it's not a real big problem with me because I kind of anticipate it being such an early RPG. But going back to the quirkiness, I think that's what kind of sold me on the game. Just the fact that you're not a warrior that's a knight or a mystical hero or a destined hero. You're just a little kid with psychic powers, and your weapon is a bat, you know? And what I usually find funny is, of course, the encounters and the fact that you don't kill any enemies. You either make them quiet, or in the case of fighting the hippie, you regain their senses, which I painted the picture of my main character beating the crap out of him, back to being his normal self. And the music, what I really like is there's different battle themes for different enemies, and the battle theme that accompanies the hippie is very awesome. I cacked myself laughing. But the game has a lot of charm, I gotta say, and I think for a younger audience or for an audience that doesn't like to take their games too seriously, I think they will love it. Uh, but like I said, the main inspiration is, of course, real life because the healing items are like juice boxes and food and everything, and the weapons are kind of realistic because you've got baseball bats and knives and frying pans and all this. So someone who's looking for an RPG that's kind of ties to the real world, you'll probably like it. It's got a bit of sci-fi, a little bit of fantasy, but I definitely say it was targeted at a younger audience. And so far, I I enjoyed it, but I kind of had to put it down because I wasn't interested in that style of game. I definitely will say that I will beat it at one stage or another, but at this time, I'm still kind of heavy into Shining Force 3, and that's all I've kind of think about and want to beat. So I'll definitely talk about that after Arrow talks about his challenge with Fantasy Star.
Oh yeah, definitely. But before we get into Fantasy Star, I have to say that once you announced you were going to be playing Mother 1, I just knew I had to give it a try myself. Uh, Fantasy Star was, of course, first on my mind, but I'll get to that in a second. So, at some point this week, with my long train rides, I was able to play Mother 1 as well. And for me, I've already beaten Earthbound, and that's one of my favorite RPGs for all the reasons Greg just mentioned. It's very charming, different setting and such. And I absolutely loved Earthbound. So I went into Mother 1, Earthbound Zero as it's called in Western world, uh, thinking it would be the same game, but then for the 8-bit system. And basically, I got what I expected. It was a 8-bit, more archaic system, with the talking to people and such. But it still had that the charm, that foundation set up for Earthbound. And while I really enjoyed Mother 1, it indeed suffers from that very early classic RPGs. But at least the style is the same. The graphics are very charming. The characters, enemies, music, and I absolutely love Mother 1, and that's definitely very great. I was able to beat it though, and I feel that it has a lot of similarities to Earthbound. I don't want to go all out by saying that Earthbound is technically more of a remake than a sequel, but it does feel that way. And we can only see how much Mother 3 has improved over Earthbound. But I'll get to that in a second. But I definitely hope that you're able to play Mother 1 to the end and eventually move on and see how much the Mother series has improved, especially with Earthbound. So that's pretty much it for Mother 1. I absolutely love playing it. It wasn't as long as I expected, but long train rides definitely make hours go by very fast. But yeah, my weekly challenge was, of course, Fantasy Star. Fantasy Star, of course, his first RPG, from Sega, and I just absolutely loved it. After we were done recording, I was still big into East Oath in Felgana, but I just had to. After we recorded the first episode, I just had to play Fantasy Star. So I got down Sega's Ultimate Genesis collection, booted up Fantasy Star, and I was just amazed by the game. It feels really revolutionary for its time. I was really able to get into that mindset as if I were playing this game, as one of the first RPGs, Dragon Quest is only out, and Final Fantasy just is all the week, and then see Fantasy Star, comparing it to those first iterations. Fantasy Star just absolutely blew me away. I'm a big fan of sci-fi, and I love the blend of medieval and sci-fi. Like you mentioned earlier in the podcast, female protagonist, unlike anything I've seen before. I've been hearing people talk about how shocked they were to see Samus Aran being a female bounty hunter, but just having Alice or Alyssa as the Fantasy Star, main protagonist, absolutely fantastic. In terms of storytelling, with the cutscenes, again, way ahead of its time. The fluid character animation is something that hasn't even been done, all the way up until Dragon Quest 4 and Final Fantasy 4, where enemies started moving. It's just amazing, And then we haven't even talked about the 3D dungeons, which I absolutely loved. It makes it feel like those dungeon crawlers that I got into, with Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey and the Darkspire. Overall, the difficulty, it was very grind heavy, but at the same time, not insanely difficult. Some of the quests and items were a little bit hard to find, and I have to be honest and say that at a couple of points in the game I had to resort to a walkthrough to see where I needed to go, but that's very hard to escape, with very classic RPGs unless you want to turn your head and go insane, you know. But overall, Fantasy Star was just an amazing game to play through. I think I beat it in around 8 to 10 hours. Again, very grind heavy, but overall, what a quest, you know. Just getting the better equipment from even hidden dungeons, you know, optionary dungeons, the overall story, the characters that are in your party. You know, the four characters, the Meow, the cat-like character, and there's also Odin, more of a bounty hunter slash warrior, and then finally Noah, the mage. Uh, Overall, just great party, great characters, storytelling, fantastic. I just absolutely love Fantasy Star, and I can see why you like it so much. You know, it's a fantastic RPG, and if I were to play this, if this was my first RPG, I just knew that I would have been blown away and would have been a huge Fantasy Star fan. And I really want to get into the sequels at some point, which is of course with so many different games hard to just go into Fantasy Star, but yeah, Fantasy Star was amazing, and I can't thank you enough for recommending. I don't know what you want to add to that, but absolutely fantastic.
Uh, I'm very happy that you got to beat Fantasy Star. Of course, I was only 6 when I saw this game from start to finish. I have many great stories about the times that my family played Fantasy Star. Um, just being a kid, just learning about sci-fi and fantasy. Of course, I kind of looked to it, being better than the real world. And Fantasy Star was my first sci-fi universe where I saw, soldiers with guns and creatures, biomechanical creatures, and everything. And I was just so blown away. It was just all new to me. I just learned about all these things through Fantasy Star. And whenever I look at the party system, what is the best party ever? I always just look back to the original cast of Fantasy Star of Alice Landale, Mal, Odin, and Noah. And they always represent like the perfect party to me because of all the great memories I've had playing that game. What's really funny is in the later games, Noah's character is referred to a lot. But the problem with this is he's not called Noah in the English version. In the Japanese version, he's called Lutz. And the problem with that is in the later games on the Mega Drive, he's referred to as Lutz. So there was a lot of confusion. But later on, when the fans found out about the Japanese versions, that was cleared up. I always like to call him Noah just to refer to him to the first game, but his name is Lutz. But you'll find one of the most charming things about Fantasy Star is the source material. They do connect a lot of things from game to game, even though they're set thousands of years apart, which is absolutely fantastic. You will encounter lots of creatures from the first game and the next few games, and some I don't want to give too much away, but you will enjoy each game as you play it. But I have to warn you about 3, which I consider to be the black sheep of the series. Um, I wouldn't say skip it, but just beware, because I don't think it's as good as 1, 2, and 4. But just one of the funny stories I want to touch upon, I just want to ask you, Arrow, how hard was it for you to find the mirror shield needed to beat Medusa?
The mirror shield, yeah, that was definitely very very hard. You know, I don't even want to talk about how you get the information. You basically get the information from the mirror shield in one of the towns that you can only reach that town by finding a different item because that town is hidden away. I have to be honest and say that the only time that I used the search option, which is available in the menu, you know, was to find the mirror shield. And that definitely was one of the points in the game where I just had to resort to a walkthrough. And once I read it, that I have to search on the ground instead of just finding it, like in a chest or something. Uh, I understood it, but I knew that it was on that island after a specific character in one of the towns told me about it.
Okay, now RPG fans, now go back to the early 90s where there was no internet and there was no walkthroughs. Basically, all you had in games like that was the information that the characters gave you, and you would have to talk to them again and again to just piece the puzzle in your head. Now, the mirror shield in question drove my family insane. My dad couldn't find it. My brother couldn't find it. I was too young to even begin where to search. So what happened was in the end is my older sister, of all people, swooped in and found it within a couple of seconds. And I always found that to be, I don't know, very hilarious because at that time it was mainly just my dad and myself. And my sister did play games, but for them to be pulling their hairs out and for my sister just to swoop in to find it, that's probably my most memorable memory of witnessing Fancy Star. It's just that happening. Of course, I remember that so thoroughly that when I went to play it years later by myself, when I got into RPGs by myself and I could play them by myself, I'd always know where to look straight away because I just had that memory with me. And I could talk about my memories with Fantasy Star from start to the finish, but like Arrow covered, the music is fantastic. If you want to know how good Fantasy Star's music was, for being an 8-bit game, type in Fantasy Star and the track called Tower, which is one of the dungeon themes used for the more memorable sort of big dungeons, and it's one of the best pieces of music on the Master System. Of course, the story of the memorable characters was fantastic, just the encounters. I can go on about it, but I'm very happy that Arrow got to experience it. And I do want to stress to everyone who wants to play it, it is very grind heavy. If you want to make the game easier, I suggest doing a huge grind session at the start of the game. I mean, take as much time as you possibly can just to go outside the town and grind, because even setting foot in just parts of the first area, you can get your butt handed to you quite easily. So you need to grind for experience, you need to grind for gold to get the equipment in the town. It does make a giant difference to standing a chance in the game. So to anyone wanting to play Fantasy Star, I wish you the best of luck. It's definitely one of the best RPGs, of course, I've ever played, and it was the game that got me into RPGs, so I highly recommend it. Anyone that wants to play it, I dare say you can download it on the many downloadable services, whether it be PC or Wii. And of course, the best way I find in this era is to buy the Ultimate Genesis slash Mega Drive collection. It's on there as a secret unlockable, and it contains all the other Fantasy Star games, so it's well worth the money. And of course, you get all those other wonderful Mega Drive games.
Like Shining Force 1 and 2, which I really want to get into as well.
And it's also got Shining in the Darkness, which is actually the first game that takes place before 1.
Oh yeah, definitely. Forgot about that. But yeah, that's about it for Fantasy Star. I absolutely loved it. And so the big question remains, what will be my next weekly challenge? Some, of course, might already guessed it. I am going to be playing and finalizing the entire Mother series by playing Mother 3. I can't wait to play it. You know, it is a fan-translated game, and I really can't wait to play it. You know, it's probably one of the best games out there, especially for the Game Boy Advance, and I can't wait, you know, to delve into Mother 3. How about you, Greg? What will you be playing as your weekly challenge?
Okay, I've had to look into this a bit much. There's been some really good recommendations given to me, of course, by my friends and other subscribers. I'd have to kind of dedicate this to my good friend Taylor. He's talked about this series for a while now, and he's got me interested. I am going to play on the Super Famicom Metal Max Returns. And for all of you out there that want to know what Metal Max is, it's this RPG that has heavy ties to cyberpunk. And I've seen some of the battles in that game. It kind of looks like Final Fantasy to begin with, but in a very post-apocalyptic setting. Like, you know, you've got grungy sort of people that have guns and rocket launchers, and at one stage I've heard you get tanks and ride tanks and all that. I was very interested in it because just the art style and just how it all plays out. But I found out that there was two versions of the first game. There is the first one, which is Metal Max on the NES or Famicom, and there's Metal Max Returns on the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom. And not to diss the Famicom, but I'm a big fan of 16-bit, so I'm definitely going to go with Metal Max Returns.
All right. Yeah, I've heard tiny little bits, on the Metal Max, especially from Taylor. He really enjoys that series. Very interesting. I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are on the series, how it compares to other series, and who knows, it might pop up, in my weekly challenge at some point. But very nice pick. I'm definitely interested. So yeah, I think that's about it for the weekly challenge. I will be playing Mother 3, and you will be playing Metal Max Returns. So I'm very interested. And hopefully we'll be able to get through the games. And until then, I will be playing some more other games. I'm highly anticipating Catherine, which should be here in a couple of days. And of course, I already finished East Oath in Ghana, so at some point I will be starting E7 as well. Any other games beside Shining Force, Scenario 3, and Metal Max on your mind at the moment, Greg?
There's a few RPGs I want to play. I actually don't want to announce them yet, but it's for a future episode. I've been meaning to play them, so I'll definitely focus on that. I've kind of put Miramasa down. I probably will pick it up for a later date. Like basically I said before, my main focus this week, and it kind of took it off the challenge, is more Shining Force 3 because I'm on the final scenario and I'm really looking forward to beating it. And more than that, it's actually the best out of all the scenarios. I really love the party that I've amassed in that game. It's incredibly bizarre. Just to give you an indication, like the last couple of characters, like I got a unicorn, I got a fully fledged dragon, and I got a lion humanoid sort of character that wields an axe. And I just look at the initial party, and it's just so diverse, full of different characters from different races, and it's one of the best parties I've ever had in an RPG. And it's really cool that the advisor of the battalion is a giant owl that looks like a mage, and I'm just like, yeah, I think I can't remember the designer's name. I'll have to tell that information at a later date. But I love his artwork and his character designs. It's just absolutely awesome. And from where I am in the game, I'm actually at the turning point for where the other scenarios end. The start of the third scenario takes place a bit just before the end of scenario 1 and 2. And in chapter 3, you actually meet up with the other parties from the other scenarios that, in the area where the end takes place. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that finally pans out and where the game continues on. One thing I do like about scenario 3 is the chapters are a lot shorter because all the other scenario of Shining Force 1 and 2 have 6 chapters in all. But the thing about scenario 3 is it's got 7, and it's got the initial 6, and the 7th chapter is the chapter that ties up, is the finale, not just of that scenario, but of the entire series. And I pretty much looked into it, and I've heard that pretty much it's all these battles leading up to the final battle in the final chapter. So I'm really looking forward to getting there. And I've had a lot of fun. What can I say? It's definitely been one of the best experiences I've had gaming in all my life.
Awesome, yeah. I just hear you talk about Shining Force. I will at some point, of course, put time down to get into the games, but that sounds really good that you're really enjoying it. That's something, that excitement that I had for the E series recently, and I hope many more soon. So yeah, let's see. I think this about wraps up the second episode of Rpgibberish. Of course, we've been talking for an hour long on Mistwalker, and I hope everybody got acquainted and interested on this fantastic company. We've talked about great lengths about our weekly challenge, our upcoming weekly challenge, which again will be Metal Max Returns for Greg and Mother 3 for myself. And yeah, all I can say is we definitely enjoy doing the podcast, and please again continue to leave feedback on the episodes. And I don't know, Greg, do you have any closing words?
One of the ideas we had is we wanted to talk of basically Ero and I got together one day and we pretty much discuss all the games and the companies that we really like. And our basically love of Mistwalker is very mutual. So we've had different experiences, so it was definitely the right choice for this episode. Um, so I was very, very happy to talk about it because Mistwalker makes amazing games, and I really do hope that they continue on for years to come. So I would definitely say that again. Thank you, Ero, for another great podcast. The feedback I've heard from everyone that's listened to it so far has been fantastic. I want to thank you all for being such wonderful, wonderful RPG fans, and it motivates us to continue with this, and try and make it you know as interesting or a little more interesting as we possibly can each episode. Now we are still looking into getting guests. We're trying to organize that. We have one of our episodes planned in events, and we know who we want to get, so we're working on that. It's going to be a great episode. I know a lot of fun. He's a really good friend of us, and I know he's going to provide a lot of great information on this series. But that's pretty much it for now, and I look forward to next week's episode. We haven't really decided what it's going to be, but we'll figure that out when that time comes.
Oh yeah, definitely. Always a surprise, you know. We'll see how the week goes. But yeah, if you're anybody's interested in being guest, we have had some PMs already. Definitely keep them going, and we'll contact you, you know, with the details. Also, for those interested in checking out the podcast, you know, to download through MP3, check out the details below. We should have both episodes up for download on MP3 right now. So I think that about wraps up the second part of Rpgibberish. Definitely check back soon. And I want to thank everybody for watching and listening. And we'll be back next week with the third episode. Once again, thanks for listening everybody to the second episode of Rpgibberish. Now, as you might have guessed, we are going to be doing the podcast in a slightly different way than we originally planned. Basically, because of the lengthy editing process, we have decided to cut up episodes into two parts, where you basically have the real episode, you know, talking about a company, in this case, of course, Mistwalker, in the 1 week, and then the next week we will save the bonus content, or as we'd like to call it, the optional dungeon, for the next week. So that's why in this weekend we've only released, you know, the weekly challenge, the games we've been playing, and we will continue to do this for quite a while, you know, to see how it goes. If there are any objections to that, you know, definitely let us know, of course, but this way it saves at least me, you know, a lot of editing time, and hopefully it's for the best, you know, because podcasts can once again take quite a while, and we strive to make them under an hour long, but of course it's very hard to do if you're talking about a fantastic company or series. So hopefully this is for the best. This is a brief update, you know, recorded 2 weeks after the original recording. Later today we will be recording the third episode, which will be about the Atelier series made by Gust. So look forward to that next week, and of course the week after that we will be having the weekly challenge and the other bonus content. There have been quite a lot of awesome updates, you know, at least on my part as well as on Greg's part, so definitely look forward to that. I want to thank everybody once again for watching, and definitely tune in next week and the week after that for Rpgibberish. And like I said, this is going to be the new bi-weekly podcast, and I hope everybody will enjoy content in both weeks. And once again, please do leave us feedback. So once again, thank you guys for watching or listening, and I'll see you next week.
Basically, these aliens, and this is pretty simplistic. I've only played it for, I'd say, about 5 to a couple of hours. And like I said, the best thing about the story is it doesn't take itself seriously, but it's very basic, which is not a bad thing. But I can honestly see this game being more targeted towards younger children, because the party is a bunch of younger children, just in like elementary school. And being an adult of 26, if I wasn't like so big into RPGs back in the day, I probably wouldn't have continued on playing it. But because I've played RPGs all my life. I'm used to games like that. It's extremely basic. It feels like Dragon Quest at times, like the really earlier Dragon Quest. Even the interface reminds me, I mean, you can't.
Your guys are all wondering, of course, how is it going with the weekly challenge and what have we been playing. So, for those everybody interested in Mistwalker, this is the first part of the podcast, and we'll now move on into the bonus round where we'll be talking about the weekly challenge. And I will give it to Greg to talk about the game Mother 1.
Okay, now this is a series I've wanted to get into for a very long time. At first, it really didn't interest me with the setting, but since I visited Starman.net and the other fan sites and spoken to a lot of people on YouTube, they hail the game as one of the greatest ever. So it's always interested me. So I thought last week was the week where I finally, you know, promised to play it, and I picked it up. And I gotta say, for an RPG made in 1989, it is very interesting. So let me get into what I find is the strengths of the game. Well, the biggest strength I like to talk about is the fact that the game does not take itself seriously. And that's the biggest charm I've played of the game. The enemies that you fight are completely far-fetched. From wallies to hippies to basically evil controlling cars. It really is a crazy world. That's basically its main inspiration was from, I would say, 80s America. Just looking at the game just reminds me of like a lot of 80s movies I watched where you would see the kids ride their bikes in the street, just playing baseball and everything. And that's what Mother sort of reminds me of. So I'd like to say the fact that that's a good thing and a bad thing because it's a matter of taste. I can honestly see a lot of people not getting into the Marvel series because honestly, it actually took me a couple of years to finally sort of get as much information I need to make the game interesting for me to play it. But initial look, I actually did not. Well, I was just not interested in it at first, but just listening to everyone, I thought I'd give it a go. So basically, what the story is you've got your character, and basically he has these psychic powers, and he has to press a button to talk to people. You literally have to open the menu and talk to people, which it's not a real big problem with me because I kind of anticipate it being such an early RPG. But going back to the quirkiness, I think that's what kind of sold me on the game. Just the fact that you're not a warrior that's a knight or a mystical hero or a destined hero. You're just a little kid with psychic powers, and your weapon is a bat, you know? And what I usually find funny is, of course, the encounters and the fact that you don't kill any enemies. You either make them quiet, or in the case of fighting the hippie, you regain their senses, which I painted the picture of my main character beating the crap out of him, back to being his normal self. And the music, what I really like is there's different battle themes for different enemies.